February 3rd, 2013. A 19-year-old girl types what would become her final message to the world. So yesterday, I found out that my soon-to-be ex-fiancé Carlos is getting out of jail in 2 weeks, the day before our 1-year anniversary. She hits enter. The post goes live on Facebook. 3 days later, her phone goes dead. 12 years later, Emily Lynn Hieber has never been seen again. But here's what makes this case absolutely chilling. Emily didn't just vanish. She disappeared along with her beloved miniature pinscher, Bruiser. No trace, no goodbye, no explanation. Just a young woman and her dog swallowed by the desert of Yuma, Arizona, leaving behind only digital footprints and a family desperate for answers. This is the story of Emily Hieber, a story that will take you through drug-fueled nights, dangerous relationships, and a web of people who investigators believe know exactly what happened but refuse to speak. And by the end, you'll understand why this case has haunted a family for over a decade. Emily's story begins not with her disappearance, but with the slow unraveling of a promising young life. Picture this: a bright-eyed teenager with brown hair and green eyes preparing for her senior year of high school. Emily had dreams, plans, a future mapped out ahead of her. But sometime during the summer of 2012, everything changed. The drugs came first. What started as experimentation quickly spiraled into something much darker. Methamphetamine became Emily's new reality, and with it came a complete transformation of the girl her family once knew. By the time she turned 18, Emily had moved out of her mother's house, cutting the last threads that connected her to stability. The people she surrounded herself with painted a disturbing picture. Her social circle became a revolving door of individuals with criminal records, people who had been in and out of jail for violence and drug charges. These weren't casual acquaintances. These were the people Emily was living with, depending on, trusting with her life. But perhaps the most significant person in Emily's new world was Carlos, her fiancé, the man she planned to marry, despite the fact that he was currently serving time behind bars. Their relationship was complicated, intense, and as we'll discover, potentially dangerous. Here's where the timeline becomes crucial. Carlos was set to be released from jail in mid-February 2013. Emily knew this. In fact, she had been counting down the days. But something had changed in her mind. That final Facebook post revealed her true intentions. She was planning to break up with him the moment he walked free. Now, imagine being Emily in those first few days of February 2013. You've made a life-changing decision. You're going to end an engagement with someone who has a criminal background. You've announced it publicly on social media, and you know he's about to be released from jail with access to that information. On February 3rd, Emily made what would be her final visit to see people who truly cared about her. She drove to her grandparents' house in Yuma, bringing along Bruiser, her miniature pinscher. This wasn't unusual. Emily often visited her grandparents, and they always welcomed both her and her dog. If you're finding this story as gripping as I am, and you want to see more deep dives into cases that demand justice, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happens next in Emily's story will leave you questioning everything you think you know about missing person cases. That afternoon at her grandparents' house would later be described as normal, even hopeful. Emily's grandmother later told investigators that nothing seemed wrong with Emily that day. In fact, quite the opposite. Emily appeared to be trying to get her life back on track. She seemed determined, focused, like someone who had finally decided to make positive changes. But here's what makes this visit so haunting in retrospect. Emily's grandmother sensed that her granddaughter was attempting to put her life back together after years of drug addiction. It was as if Emily knew she was at a crossroads, and she was choosing the path toward recovery and stability. They talked, they laughed. Emily played with Bruiser while her grandparents watched, probably thinking about how good it was to see their granddaughter looking healthier, more hopeful. When Emily finally left that evening, her grandparents had no idea they had just said goodbye forever. 3 days passed. Emily's phone, which had been active constantly, suddenly went silent on February 6th. For a young woman who lived her life on social media, who posted regularly and stayed connected with friends online, this silence was deafening. But here's where this case takes an incredible turn that most people don't know about. Emily wasn't reported missing immediately. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into over a month. It wasn't until March 26, 2013, nearly 2 months after Emily's disappearance, that her grandfather finally contacted the Yuma Police Department. Why the delay? This question has puzzled investigators and Emily's family for years. Was it because Emily had a history of staying with different people, sometimes for days or weeks at a time? Was it because her drug use had made her behavior unpredictable? Or was there something more calculated at play? When police finally began their investigation, what they uncovered was a maze of connections, locations, and people that painted a picture of a young woman living on the edges of society. Emily had been linked to over 100 different locations between Yuma and Imperial County. She had been staying with multiple people, moving from place to place, never establishing a permanent residence. The investigation revealed something that should terrify anyone who has ever loved someone struggling with addiction. Emily hadn't just been moving between different locations. She had been traveling to Mexico on occasion. Think about that for a moment. A 19-year-old American girl with a drug problem, crossing international borders, staying with people involved in criminal activities. Detective Melissa Norrid from the Yuma Police Department began piecing together Emily's final weeks, and what she discovered was a complex web that stretched across state lines and international borders. Emily's movements in those last months weren't random. There was a pattern, a network of people who all seemed connected through one common thread: methamphetamine. But here's where this case becomes even more disturbing. The investigation revealed that Emily had been heavily involved with people who were deep into the meth trade. These weren't casual users. These were individuals operating at levels that brought violence, intimidation, and deadly consequences for those who crossed them. Private investigator Dave McDowell was hired by Emily's family, and his findings paint a chilling picture. McDowell has interviewed hundreds of people connected to Emily's case. Hundreds. And here's his most haunting conclusion. He believes he has personally spoken to people who know exactly what happened to Emily Hieber. Let that sink in. There are people walking free today who know whether Emily is alive or dead. They know where she is. They know what happened on February 3, 2013, or in the days immediately following, and they have chosen to remain silent for over 12 years. McDowell's investigation uncovered patterns that law enforcement had missed or couldn't pursue due to jurisdictional limitations. Emily's connection to the drug trade wasn't peripheral. She was embedded deep within a network that operated on both sides of the Mexican border. These were people for whom violence was a business tool and disappearances were a way to solve problems. The story you're hearing right now contains details that most coverage of Emily's case has missed. If you're as invested in finding answers as Emily's family is, smash that like button and share this video, because the more people who know Emily's story, the greater the chance that someone with information will finally come forward. Now, let's talk about the theories surrounding Emily's disappearance, because each one reveals something different about the world Emily was living in. Theory 1. Emily ran away voluntarily. Supporters of this theory point to the fact that her dog disappeared with her. They argue that Emily, facing the prospect of confronting Carlos upon his release, decided to disappear completely. She had expressed intentions to break up with him, and perhaps she feared his reaction enough to stage her own disappearance. But here's why this theory falls apart under scrutiny. Emily left behind everything. Her social media accounts, which were central to her identity, went completely silent. For someone who posted regularly and maintained active communication with friends, this represents a complete personality change. Additionally, Emily had been making efforts to get clean, to rebuild relationships with her family. Why would someone on the path to recovery choose to disappear just as things were improving? Theory 2. Emily was murdered by someone connected to her drug use. This theory suggests that Emily either witnessed something she shouldn't have, owed money to dangerous people, or became a liability that needed to be eliminated. The timing of her disappearance, just days before Carlos's release, could be coincidental, or could represent someone taking advantage of a situation where suspicion would naturally fall on her ex-fiancé. Theory 3, and perhaps the most disturbing, Emily was trafficked across the Mexican border. McDowell has received multiple tips suggesting that Emily was taken against her will to Mexico. Given her history of traveling there and her connections to people involved in cross-border criminal activities, this scenario becomes tragically plausible. But here's what makes this case particularly heartbreaking. Emily's family has never stopped searching. Her mother posts regularly on the Facebook page, "Help us find Emily Hieber," sharing memories, updates, and desperate pleas for information. 12 years later, she still believes her daughter is out there somewhere. The most recent post from Emily's mother is devastating in its raw emotion. She writes about seeing Emily for the last time, about holding on to hope while watching years pass without answers. She appeals directly to whoever knows what happened, begging them to find their conscience, to provide closure for a family that has lived in limbo for over a decade. The Yuma Police Department officially classified Emily's case as cold, but that designation doesn't mean the investigation has ended. It means they've exhausted their immediate leads and are waiting for new information to surface. And according to the investigators who worked the case, that information exists. Here's something most people don't realize about Emily's disappearance. The case has generated hundreds of tips over the years. People have reported seeing Emily in various locations across the United States. Some tips have placed her in different states, living under assumed identities. Others have suggested she's being held against her will in Mexico. Each tip gets investigated. Each lead gets pursued. But 12 years later, none have led to Emily or to definitive answers about what happened to her. Dave McDowell, the private investigator, remains convinced that the key to solving this case lies within Emily's circle of associates from February 2013. These are people who were part of the drug network she was involved with. People who would have known about her plans to break up with Carlos. People who would have understood the implications of that decision. The challenge isn't finding these people. Law enforcement knows who they are. The challenge is getting them to tell the truth. Some have been interviewed multiple times. Some have provided conflicting stories. Some have simply refused to cooperate altogether. But here's what gives Emily's family hope, and what should give all of us hope. Cases like this can be solved decades later. Relationships change. People develop consciences. Someone who was afraid to speak in 2013 might be willing to talk in 2025. Emily's story isn't just about one missing girl. It's about the epidemic of addiction that destroys families, the criminal networks that prey on vulnerable people, and the communities that fail to protect their most at-risk members. If this case has moved you, if you believe Emily deserves justice, subscribe to this channel and share her story. Because somewhere out there, someone is watching this video who has the answers Emily's family needs. Today, Emily would be 31 years old. She would have had over a decade to build a career, start a family, overcome her addiction, and become the person her grandmother saw glimpses of during that final visit in February 2013. Instead, her family marks each birthday, each anniversary of her disappearance, each holiday, wondering if she's alive, if she's safe, if she even knows how desperately they've searched for her. The Emily Hieber case represents something larger than one missing person. It's a window into a world where young people can disappear without trace, where criminal networks operate with impunity, where fear and loyalty to the wrong people can silence witnesses for years. But it's also a testament to the power of family love, of never giving up, of believing that somewhere in the darkness there's still light to be found. Emily's story isn't over. Her case remains active in the hearts and minds of investigators, family members, and advocates who refuse to let her become just another statistic. Every share of her story, every person who learns her name, every individual who keeps her case alive in public consciousness brings us one step closer to the truth. If you have any information about Emily Lynn Hieber's disappearance, contact the Yuma Police Department at 928-373-4700. You can remain anonymous. You could be the person who finally brings Emily home. Because after 12 years of silence, Emily Hieber deserves to have her story told. She deserves to be remembered, not as a cautionary tale about drug addiction, but as a young woman who was loved, who was missed, and who still has people fighting for her every single day. This is her story. This is Emily's story. And it's not over yet.